The Chicago Blackhawks are poised to be one of the worst teams in the NHL next season. After planning to contend ahead of 2021-22, much of the roster has now been sold off in an effort to bottom out for a high pick. The Hawks now approach the 2022-23 season ranked as one of the league's worst teams without much young talent on the NHL roster. So, what's happened to the squad in the past year, and what does the future hold for them? The Blackhawks made their intentions clear last offseason with the acquisition of Seth Jones, and moving Adam Boqvist, 2 first-round picks, including their 2022 first and a second-round pick, the Hawks were gearing up for a big year. 4 days later, they acquired Marc-Andre Fleury from the Vegas Golden Knights and Tyler Johnson from the Tampa Bay Lightning. The roster on paper looked stronger, but it was still questionable as to whether or not the Hawks would make the playoffs. Almost immediately, the Hawks were out of the race. The team lost their first 9 games and fired head coach Jeremy Colleton by the 13th game. Around the same time, GM Stan Bowman was let go, and the Blackhawks, in all aspects, hit rock bottom. As the season went on, the team continued to struggle. The worst of it was that the Hawks had already traded their 2022 first-round pick. Not only were they going to miss the playoffs, but the team was unable to accept the consolation prize of a high pick. On March 1st, 2022, the Blackhawks named their next general manager. Kyle Davidson, who was serving as interim GM, officially took over as the 10th general manager in franchise history. After the Blackhawks hired Davidson, the direction of the franchise shifted almost immediately. The Hawks were not a good team, and so they did their best to recoup some assets at the trade deadline. Brandon Hagel, one of Chicago's standout performers, was the first to go. 23 years old at the time of the trade, Hagel was the type of player the Hawks would be expected to keep around. However, the return was too good to pass up. Chicago managed to acquire a 2023 first-round pick, 2024 first-round pick, Boris Katchouk, and Taylor Radish from the Tampa Bay Lightning. While Hagel was playing well, this was a huge return for a middle six forward. Next, they flipped off-season acquisition Marc-Andre Fleury, managing to get a 2022 second-round pick from the Minnesota Wild. Both these moves made the team significantly worse, as the Hawks had now traded their second leading goal scorer and the goalie who had played 45 of their 61 games thus far. Chicago finished the season 6th last in the NHL, putting their draft lottery odds at 7.5% to land the first pick. Fortunately, they didn't win, as winning would have meant that the Columbus Blue Jackets would receive their 2023 first-round pick instead. Given the moves the Hawks would make shortly afterwards, it's important to understand why they continue to tear the team apart, and why their 2023 first-round pick is so valuable. The 2023 draft is expected to be one of the best draft classes in recent memory. The target for all tanking teams, Blackhawks included, is Connor Bedard. Bedard looks to be the next generational talent entering the NHL. As a 15-year-old, Bedard scored 28 points in 15 games in the WHL, placing him second in the league in points per game, despite being as much as 5 years younger than some of his competition. Last season, Bedard scored 51 goals and produced 100 total points, and just recently won World Juniors Gold, producing above a point per game on Team Canada's first line after just turning 17 years old. Bedard is the main prize, but the consolation isn't bad either. Projected second and third overall picks Matvei Michkov and Adam Fantilli have both been described as players that could have gone first overall had they not been in Bedard's draft. Michkov projects as a potential franchise sniper with dynamic offensive skill, while Fantilli could be a franchise power forward with a wide array of offensive tools. Under the new NHL draft lottery system, the last place team cannot pick lower in the draft than number 3. Placing in the bottom of the NHL allows for teams to be guaranteed one of these 3 potential superstars. Teams are betting on the abilities of these young stars, and the Blackhawks may be doing it more than anybody else. Alex DeBrincat and Kirby Dach are 24 and 21 years old respectively. Like Hagel, these are typically the types of players a franchise would hold on to through a rebuild. With a shot at Bedard though, both were shipped out during the draft. DeBrincat was the first to go. The Blackhawks traded him to the Ottawa Senators in exchange for the 7th overall pick in the 2022 draft, the 39th overall pick, and a 2024 third-round pick. In making this trade, the Hawks essentially recaptured their original draft pick, now drafting 7th overall instead of the original 6th place. They used the pick to select Kevin Korchinski, the first left defenseman off the board in the draft. Dach was then traded shortly afterwards to the Montreal Canadiens. In exchange, the Hawks received the 13th and 66th overall picks, which they used to select Frank Nazar and Gavin Hayes. And despite not starting draft day with a single first-round pick, Chicago would select one more time after acquiring Peter Mrazek in the 25th overall pick in exchange for the 38th overall pick. They selected defenseman Sam Rinzel. And so, the Chicago Blackhawks exited the 2022 draft having added 3 first-round prospects and having made the roster significantly weaker. While the objective for the Blackhawks is crystal clear ahead of next season, there are still some questions about the roster. Most notably, Jonathan Toews and Patrick Kane. With most of the team's best players gone, questions have been asked about the longtime Blackhawks veterans. Both Toews and Kane have 1 year remaining on their contracts. Given that Toews has only played 71 games over the past 2 seasons and only scored 37 points, his $10.5 million contract is likely too big a risk for any team to take a chance on, even with 50% salary retention. Kane, on the other hand, holds much more value to interested teams. Last season, Kane scored 92 points in 78 games, good for a production rate of 1.18 points per game and 15th place in league-wide scoring. Kane is one of the very best offensive talents around the league, and if his contract was half retained, it presents the opportunity for a team to acquire a perennial point-per-game player at a $5.25 million cap hit. Rumors of a trade have circulated all summer, with teams such as the Rangers and Oilers reportedly interested. In moving Kane, the Blackhawks would lose their best player for a massive haul of assets, allowing the team to increasingly stockpile futures while also increasing their chances at Bedard. If Kane and Toews stay, this is how the roster looks for next season. It already looks very weak, and if the two are moved, the Blackhawks are the frontrunners to finish in last place, if they aren't already. The Chicago Blackhawks are going all out in the race to the bottom, and will very likely land one of Bedard, Michkov, or Fontilli. On top of their 3 2022 first-round picks, and the returns the Hawks may get for Kane and Toews, the rebuild that began under 1 year ago may be over a lot sooner than expected.